Alrighty, guys, welcome to the Keaton Nelson Show. Today, I have a very special guest for you. She's a good friend of mine, and she is absolutely crushing it with her coaching business. And um, she's got quite a history and a lot of awesome experiences that I'm so excited for her to share on the podcast. And I think she's got a podcast of her own that is either launched or launching, and we're going to chat about that too. Kamrin, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, Keaton.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know you, for a couple of reasons. We did the Brittany Dro's coaching program together, the Entrepreneurs Club, which was awesome. And we got to, start a relationship there. But I'm I'm interested for the viewers to kind of get to know you and where are you originally from?
I was born in Seattle, Washington, and grew up in Marysville, Washington, which was a small town about 50 minutes north of Seattle.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like growing up? Were your parents rich, poor? How'd you grow up? Did you go to public school, private school, homeschool? What was your life like growing up?
Oh, goodness. Well, so my parents divorced when I was 2.
Oh, wow.
And they were already, I think they'd already been separated for a while. So I grew up with a single mom and went to see my dad every other weekend. And my mom worked really hard. I was a latchkey kid. You go to school, you come home, you let yourself in. And I remember eating a can of canned frosting out of the fridge and watching Dukes of Hazzard and MTV because it had just come out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, we were, I would say, middle class. It was, and I went to public school all the way through until college. And I loved it. I actually had the opportunity to go to a private school because my dad was building different wings and was on the board of a private school in Ojai, California. And at the time, I didn't necessarily have the wherewithal to understand the educational impacts of that. And I was just like, no way, I'm not leaving my friends and boyfriend and stayed in public school. And I had a great time.
Nice. Yeah. I love public school. And I was like a latchkey kid too, from pretty young age. I'd, take the bus, get home at 3. Yep. And I remember kicking my shoes off at the couch and grabbing a bag of chips or frosting or eating leftover birthday cake or whatever. And just watching TV until, 5 o'clock. And then my mom would come through the door and she'd be really mad that I didn't take the chicken out to defrost.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So where'd you go to college? What did you go to school for?
So I started out at the University of Washington. That was where my father went, my grandfather went, and my aunt went, and some cousins. And I just kind of went there, and it's a fantastic school, but it wasn't a great school for me. It was just too big. At the time I was I was studying international politics and Japanese and really the art of drinking. Yeah. It was a disaster of a freshman year. I dropped out about 3/4 of the way through, destroyed some friendships along the way. It was not great. And then my parents, who were paying for college at the time, said that, that was done, that I would need to if I wanted to go to college, I would need to pay my way. And so I worked at an espresso stand and paid my way through community college to get an AA degree. And then after I had proven that I was serious about being a student and got my shit together, so to speak, I started looking at 4-year schools again. And I was lucky enough to get some scholarship and also the help from my mom and dad. I don't exactly know how that worked, if they pooled sources, or if it was just all dad or some mom. I don't really know, but I was really lucky in the sense that they helped with that. And I graduated from Gonzaga University, which is a small Jesuit private school in Spokane, Washington. And I loved it. It was so much better for me. So instead of being in a place with, where I think one of my classes at UW had like 1,000 people in it.
Yep.
Whereas the small school had I had classes with 25. And that was also where I really departed from the international politics idea and went into communications and advertising and marketing. I really found that really just kind of listening to my heart is like all the classes that were required for that were the things that I loved. So I have a degree in public relations and marketing and advertising.
Oh, that's crazy. I didn't even know that. So
it's never been used.
Yeah. So did you go right into fashion out of college?
No.
What did you do out of college?
I went backpacking for a year.
Nice. Where?
I went to Fiji.
What?
And New Zealand and Australia with my childhood friend, Shalyn Flavel. And she was celebrating her 5-year cancer-free birthday. And I was celebrating, I made it like mostly sober through college and graduated celebration. And so we backpacked for a year. And I remember writing to my mom, like, Mom, like you can travel, like we stay in places for like $5 a night. And now as a mom and as an adult, it's like, oh my God, I would never stay in some of the places that we stayed. Some of the youth hostels were great. But some of them were, pretty sketchy. And on that trip though, I had this premonition that I wasn't going home, and it hit me really strongly. And I felt it physically, and I was really sad about it. I'm like, but I think I want to go home. And it was just like, I just knew I wasn't going home. And I ended up returning from the trip, working for 3 months, doing odd jobs, trying to save up money for an apartment, first and last month's rent. And I had this unique opportunity to move to China. And it was, just this kind of strange, crashing of events together. I'd always wanted to live in a culture where I knew nothing, where I had to be totally immersed and learn everything. I just didn't know it would be China. I didn't know it, and I did not know it would be in a factory. And I worked for a Taiwanese factory called Xieda, and they made Adidas sneakers. And I was hired to do actually, I said I never used PR. I was actually hired to do public relations for them because they were an Eastern company struggling with the relationship with their Western buyer. And they asked if I could help with this. And I was like, maybe, let's give it a shot. Sure. I don't know. And I moved to China, not knowing a word of Chinese, and this was in 1997. And it was a much different place in Southern China then than it is now. But now there's Starbucks, and it's much more westernized. Back then I was the only, Anglo person for miles. People would stop their cars if I was walking down the road and look at me. It's crazy. But it turned out to be obviously put my life on a trajectory that I hadn't expected.
And so you did PR for this company. Did you do a good job with PR?
Well, it was kind of.
What do you expect from someone who's fresh out of college, never done this before, and they're going to China to do PR?
Right.
Crazy.
It was more of glorified secretarial work. I checked faxes back then. I checked for proper English. I checked presentations, and it was clear that I could do more than what they were asking me to do. And they asked me to run their business office. I couldn't read Chinese or speak it at that point. So I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. Like that was maybe a bit of a stretch. And they said, well, see if do you know how to do costing? Can you figure this out? And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. And but I learned it from literally from the factory floor up about figuring out how much it costs to produce one shoe, so how long does it take, what goes into it, how is the line set up, how much rubber is in there, how much does rubber cost, how much is an embroidery, all of that kind of stuff. And that gave me the opportunity to start having these negotiations with Adidas. So I was working for the factory, but Adidas was our buyer. And it was that bridge that really helped launch my career, because the understanding of the communication really is really what helped propel me. Certainly not because I'm a math wizard, because, my husband jokes all the time. He used to joke. Now I don't do it at all, but my job is totally different, but used to joke like you're in charge of $1.2 billion worth of goods. And you can't figure out the tip. I'm like, yeah, but I can probably get us a good deal. So it was, and I've always said that I was successful in the costing world because of the fact that I understood how to communicate with people and I put the effort into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. And just out of curiosity, how did the China job come up in the first place? Was it while you were traveling? Was it how did you apply for this job? How did you I don't even understand how an opportunity like that falls on your plate.
And it was a complete, I don't know, one of those things that just happens, because when I was home after backpacking and I was completely broke and I was working all these odd jobs trying to save up first and last month's rent, I was living at my dad's house on Orcas Island, Washington. And his friend was a writer for National Geographic. And he was doing a story on the tidal bore on, I believe, the Yellow River. And nobody that we knew went to China back then. I mean, China wasn't open. I mean, and this was probably 1996 because I moved in 97. So Hong Kong still belonged to the UK. I mean, it was different. Wow. And so, and I'm so sorry. We are the only people with a real phone.
Oh, the house phone. That's all right.
Landline. Do you want me to go turn that off?
It doesn't bother me. Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Hopefully Eric will turn it off.
There you go.
So I'm sorry, I completely lost my train of thought with that phone thing.
97 Hong Kong.
The writer. Yeah. And yes, exactly. So my dad asked his friend, he's just like, my dad has always been very much about seeing the world and seeing other cultures and understanding how things interrelate, and not just being US centric. And he asked his friend, he's like, hey, if I pay my way, can I just tag along on this National Geographic trip? And the friend was like, yeah, that's fine with me. Well, the friend's mother died the day before or the week before the trip was taking place. Mm-hmm. And my dad asked me, he's like, why don't you go on this China trip with me? He's like, it's all set up. We're going to go. And he's like, I'm going to film this thing for my friend now because the friend couldn't go. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't afford to do this. I'm like, if I pay for my airfare, I will have no money. I mean, back then $1,000 was a lot of money. And he's like, well, if you pay for your airfare, I'll pay for your room and board. So I ended up in China with my dad, and we somehow or another, his great friend Carl came along, and Carl is a total character, and he has passed since then. He was about 6'6", and the Chinese called him Da Bizi, which is big nose, because he did quite a big nose. But anyway, on this trip, we filmed the tidal bore. It's amazing. I'm in love with being in this land where I know nothing. Everything is foreign. Everything to me is new. And I just adored it. And then my dad had organized a boat trip down the Yangtze River. And this was before they built the largest dam in the world and flooded the whole thing. So you used to be able to take a boat ride through the Three Gorges. And my dad's like pretty rough and tumble. So I was prepared for like, you know, I don't know, like a junk boat, not even a junk boat, but like I mean, I didn't know if we'd be rowing down this thing.
Yeah,
Well, it
yeah,
turned out to be like kind of like the Love Boat in my mind. I'd never been on a
yeah.
cruise, you know, where you sit with people you don't know and you chat and talk, and there are talks going on. And on that trip, there was another family traveling, and it was this Taiwanese family they were having a family reunion. Some from Taiwan, some from Seattle, some from San Francisco, some from Vancouver, Canada. And I don't know, struck up a conversation. They asked me what I was doing out in the middle of China. And they
Right.
asked me what I did. And I'm like, I don't do anything, but I plan to get a job in advertising or public relations. And they started talking about, one of them was the general manager of a factory, and started talking about this relationship and the relationship issues and communication issues of the Eastern and the Western. And his brother's like, oh, you should hire her to come do PR for you. And it turned into a job offer. And 3 months later, I moved to China.
Yeah, that's just wild. And no, this is what I love is like, I feel like a lot of people just out of college are completely lost. And it's normal, like completely normal, but like it's like just the most random things that end up launching people's careers or their businesses or things like that, and that like you couldn't have ever planned, or you couldn't have ever like been like, oh, I'm gonna go eventually. By the time I'm 30, I'm gonna be an executive coach or whatever you were doing at the time. You know what I mean? But you're like, no, I'm going to go to China. And then that like got you a secretary type work job at a factory. Yeah. Then they need help doing costing. Then you end up negotiating with Adidas, which did that end up leading to you working for Adidas?
Yeah. After a year, they contacted me and they said, you know, we've started footwear production in Vietnam, and production's growing every month. Every month is our biggest month we've ever had. Our country, we're trying to put together an office and a source base. Our country manager is going nuts. Your name, you know, he's doing all the costing. Your name has come up. Would you be interested? And I'd already told the factory that I'd stay another year. But I just thought, when that opportunity came up, I just thought, oh, I'm not going to work in a factory forever. And then I went and I visited Vietnam. And I was just like, oh my God, they're going to pay me to live here? Because at that time, this was 98, something like that, 99. The trade relations between the US and Vietnam had not yet opened. And so, or normalized, sorry. And so it was still like everybody still rode motorbikes. It was not as industrialized as Southern China. In Southern China at that time, there was so much smog from all the factories in 97 in Southern China. You could hardly see across the road. And I get to Vietnam and it's just like sunny and everybody's happy. And it's this vibrant place where everybody is hoping for the normalization of the trade relations. So they are expecting that it's happening, and there's a lot of investment coming in. And it was just like, you know, and I had this really tough interview with the country manager, who became a fantastic mentor. His name was David Solk. And he was just like, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And I'm like, can you teach me? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. And he was a great teacher and mentor and really helped me learn at a really great impressionable age. And I was 27-ish or something like that, about negotiation and not screwing people, about looking for win-win, about keeping your word, about being, you know, having integrity. And he built a huge thriving business for Adidas there. And I worked like a dog. I mean, it was before the standards of engagement that most factories employ now. I mean, there are beautiful factories all over Asia now. When I was there, We worked 6 or 7 days a week in the office, and there were, days, 15-hour days. There was, I remember going 5 weeks without a day off. I went to work with some kind of Asian version of the mumps. I worked with worms, which I really don't recommend. It's gross.
Yeah.
We just worked. But at the time, at least I was young enough to do it. And it was an incredible education in itself.
It's cool.
Yeah. And as you said, you asked if that got me into Adidas, and it did. And I know
that's where I was going to lead to anyway. So I'm glad you went into it. That's really cool. Yeah. It's interesting to find like how you understand how you got to where you are now. It's like I always like to dig into that in the podcast if I can. It's very interesting. And then you ended up working at Coach. Was that next, or was there anything else in between there?
There was a step in between, or a couple of steps in between, where I noticed when I was in Vietnam that we would have teams from the US and from Germany come in. They were like designers, marketing, developers, and they'd come and they'd work on their footwear lines. And I would help with their costing, and they would do lots of sample rounds. This was back when people traveled for business.
Didn't you say there was some shady stuff going on back then too?
Oh my God. And that was one thing that our country manager was totally against. Like it, because I was costing, right? It would be so easy for a factory manager to come in with an envelope, $40,000 in cash, and just say, look, if you could just, overlook like a nickel, on this next 300,000 pair order, right? And you had to be, and that stuff happened. And we were not allowed to accept anything, no gifts, nothing. And whereas in other countries and other brands, some of that was normal. It was just like, like the factory paid for everything. Like they paid for your golf membership, they paid for, whatever, gifts, paid for your wedding, paid for whatever. And we were just not that. And so, there was some shady stuff, and it seemed like, at the time, like, I had a kind of a sour take on men at the time, because it seemed like they'd go to Asia and like all bets were off, and just, karaoke bars, prostitutes, lots of craziness. And I was just like, oh God, I'm never marrying anybody in the industry now that I know that they come out here and do this. And I did marry somebody in the industry, but I trust him that he has never done anything untold. But anyway, when these design teams would come out, they do this work on their product line and they leave and everything's happy. They hit their margin targets. They love their shoe. And then they would go back and they would continue to change and send over changes to Asia. And we would work like dogs to prepare the new samples and prepare the new costs. And then they'd be upset and not understand why their prices went up and their delivery time slid. And I was just like, somebody in the headquarters needs to help these people understand the cost of their decisions, the impact of their decisions on the supply chain. And there was like one costing person in Germany at the time and one costing person in the US at the time for Adidas. And I just raised my hand. I'm like, I think that more of these people, and it wasn't their fault. Like, how would they know that, if you're 22 years old and are told, make the coolest thing to kick Nike off the shelf, like, you don't necessarily know that, doing some kind of crazy dip on a piece of plastic is going to, take your price up $250. And it was right at the same time. It was fortuitous because of the fact that the CEO at the time had also just put out a statement about really looking at the cost of goods in the company, because that's something you can really see and you can dial down, or you used to be able to. Now it's much, much harder. But you can see it on the balance sheet. And so when I raised my hand and this thing was also coming, it was, it allowed me to, I moved to Germany. I built a team. I put my costing team members in with the other teams to help them, like, be right there, have the conversation right on hand. And again, this is common practice now, but at the time it was new, to really like be there, be a partner, let people know what the cost was. And so I did that. And then I eventually was the head of costing for Adidas, Solomon, and TaylorMade for footwear. And that was like, okay, that was my goal. Like, I wanted to be the head of, global costing. And I got there, and then Adidas bought Reebok, and I was part of the integration team. And I kind of felt like, I've reached where I need to go with this. And I'd been at Adidas for 10 years and decided I really need something. I think I need to see a perspective of another company just to, round myself out. And at the same time, I was lucky that Coach, the handbag company in New York, happened to be recruiting, and a recruiter reached out to me and said, how would you like to, we had the conversations. I was married. And we both thought, well, New York that'd be fun for a while. And moved to New York and worked for Coach Handbag Company from 2008 to 2010.
Mm-hmm. Were you in the city?
Right in the city. We
Nice.
Bought an apartment in Hell's Kitchen.
Oh, wow.
Right before the stock market crashed. So we proved to people that you can actually lose money on real estate in New York, which was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But it was,
2008 to 2010.
Yeah, it was a great time. I mean, in terms of everything happens in New York.
That's that's right near Times Square, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, right next.
Like 2 blocks over, but we were on 44th and 10th on the west side. And no.
I stayed at that old hotel there when I went. I can't remember the name of it right now. It was right there. It was like right across the street from Hell's Kitchen.
I can't think of it off the top of my head.
No,
but anyway,
So
we were on West 44th and 10th, and it was a 2-block walk to the Coach, the Coach offices, and we tried to go to as many plays as we could manage to go to on and off Broadway, and it was amazing. It was fantastic for a period of time, but because it was the crash, my husband was really having a hard time finding a job, and he's in marketing. So we figured going to New York, it'd be totally fine. Right. And it wasn't. And after 3 years, he was doing some gig work, and he was just so miserable. And I went on a business trip. We both got offered jobs at the same time. And so I got offered a job with Coach in India to run the office there, which I love India. And I thought, oh, this is awesome. I really, really want to do this. But I'm like, how can I drag this poor man? Here we go and lose a big chunk of money on real estate. He's been totally, living in this misery of not having a job, where he's a corporate guy. He really didn't like that. I'm like, I'm moving to Chennai. I mean, God, that just didn't seem fair. And at the same time, in the Singapore airport on the way home from that trip, I had a funny feeling, and I took a pregnancy test in the airport and found out that we were pregnant.
Wow.
And so then it made much more. I just told him, open up your search. We don't need to stay in New York. Just like find a job that you love. I'm flexible. It'll work out. And so we ended up in Rhode Island because of Hasbro Toy Company.
Huh, that's cool. Yeah, I didn't know that. And was that when you finished up with Coach, or when were you still working for them while you were in Rhode Island at all?
No, I left, and I had the immense luxury of taking 3 years off. Wow. When Lily was a baby. And nice. I really didn't know. I'm like, what if I hate not working? Like, I'd been a workaholic like my whole adult life. And then, but I also had this fear, like, what if I love it and never want to go back? But I always planned on going back to work. I wanted to be a role model for her, where I mean, obviously she's the center of our world, but I also wanted her to grow up knowing that mom also has other stuff that's important to her.
Right.
And so after 3 years, I went to work for Brahmin Handbag Company, which is, it was a family-owned company in Massachusetts. And it was like, they happened to be in my backyard, and a coach person with international experience happened to be in their backyard. And it seemed like a great fit. And I was there for 4.5 years. And it wasn't a great fit.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't have to go into that too much, but like you, when you were working, you were higher up in these companies, from what I understand, right? You were like right up there, like executive, heading up global teams and stuff like that. And
Yes, never. I was never in the C-suite,
no.
but I definitely had. I mean, at one point at Adidas, I didn't have a huge team, but I had 33 people, but they were in like 7 different countries.
Wow.
So yeah,
And you were working like crazy hours.
Yes.
Stuff. Yeah, like the whole time. You get 3 years off. And then is that when you started coaching, or did you use the Brahmin Handbags? You wasn't a good fit. Then I'm guessing you decided you wanted to go and help other women who are executives that are working like crazy, not getting respected the way they should, and how teaching them to have those conversations and communicate and things like that. I'm just putting stuff out there. Maybe you can explain better what you're doing right now and who you help and how you help them.
Yes, I mean, it's true. So the situation there, it taught me a lot. I have, a different time and perspective is very helpful. I can now see that, I wasn't, I had skin in the game too, in terms of the relationship not working. But I did end up in this state where my self-esteem had been completely shredded. I mean, just completely shredded, where I felt like, and I was at this point where I was like, I was forgetting things. I was on guard so much that I was constantly on guard to be attacked, or humiliated in front of other people. And
can you explain what do you mean? What was going on?
So, I have a lot of strong opinions about how operations and international operations work. And having done that my whole life, and I was, it unfortunately, in my perspective, it was I don't know that they necessarily wanted an outside view, but again, I can't speak for them. I just know that at the time, the CEO would be, we'd be in meetings, and I had a huge area. I was running all of operations, and I loved it. I mean, I was just like, oh my God, I was born for this. I was born for operations. I loved the strategy. I loved the relationships with the tanneries and the factories and my God, I went and learned how to tan leather myself. I was working with purchasing. I think I had purchasing, costing, the lab, quality, development. So leather development, material development, packaging development,
everything.
a factory in the US and the factories in Asia. And I was like, I just love this. But it was a lot. It's a lot of pieces that were moving all the time. And it felt to me like I had somehow fallen out of favor. And in retrospect, maybe it was because I felt, like what I tell people now when I coach them is like, make sure you're in lockstep with whomever you report to. Like, make sure if it feels important to you, make sure it's important to them. I felt like something was super important, and I chased after it really, really hard because in my mind, it was making an improvement. In retrospect, I should have, do you care about this as much as I do?
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
And so it's really, making that effort, even when it's uncomfortable, to say like, hey, we haven't checked in for a while. I haven't gotten any feedback for a while.
Mhm.
And I would start getting, and it was a bummer because I kept thinking this is a female run company. It's a female CEO. I'm like, this should be awesome. The directors, we were almost all female. The founder was a couple, but the founding designer was a woman. I'm like, this should be a great place for women to work. And I felt very protective of the other women there. But I would just be, it felt like picked on and called out, and asked, details about certain things in meetings, which I just couldn't remember every detail,
When you're running all that, yeah.
I just couldn't. And, and then she'd visibly roll her eyes at when I didn't know. And she'd look at, the people that were in favor, and roll her eyes and kind of laugh. And it was absolutely killing me. And just absolutely killing me. And I wanted a coach. I said, would you guys support me having a coach? Because this isn't working. Like, I can't do anything right. And they laughed at me and said that they would only support that for the greenest of managers. And so then I felt even worse. And I'm like trying to look for a coach on my own. And I'm like, I'm like in the trash can here. Like, how do I get out of this?
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out, how do you find a coach? And I'm like, do you have to, like, if you don't have a company that's going to pay for it, like, do they exist? And now that I am one, I know that we're everywhere.
Yeah.
But it made me, eventually, and it was my husband who said, you have to pick a day and it has to be your last there because we don't recognize you anymore.
Yeah.
And so I quit. And then I took 9 months to really rebuild. And I live right by Brown University. And I used to look at their continuing ed programs just to see if anything piqued my interest. And I had considered coaching for a while because of the fact that, not during the Brahmin times, but in previous times of like having these international leadership positions and having worked with other cultures and, having this breadth of this knowledge base. And I'm like, this would be something. And I think, oh, well, I'll do that, in my 50s. And I wasn't quite 50 then, but I was looking at Brown and they had added a coaching accreditation program. And I just thought, maybe this is the time, maybe don't wait. And so I took the accreditation. I loved it from the beginning. I never in my life thought I wanted to own my own business. And here I am, because I realized that I didn't want to have, I really wanted my fingerprints all over it. Like, I wanted to be able to do it in my own way. And I wanted to be accessible. I wanted to be, it's like, I wanted to be able to utilize my operational background. I am results driven, and coaching, like really like raw, straightforward coaching from a coactive coaching method is, and I have to remind myself this, the coach is not meant to be the one that comes up with the solutions. But I think that where I help my clients the most is help them get to the what will help them feel like they're moving forward. Because for me, it's very important. And I have a lot of tools around that of moving people forward. So I draw on my operational background, but then, and utilize it while helping them discover, what is really important to them. And as you alluded to, I want to help other women who are, that they are likely executives, they're likely mothers, but not necessarily. But when you are a working mom, and my friends all told me this before I went back to work, like, you're going to feel like you suck at work and you suck at home. And that was exactly how I felt. And it was like playing out. It was like, and now I want to help people realize, help women realize that there are options, that there are, that it's okay to take a breath and really reacquaint yourself with yourself. and that you're worth it. It's like, had I redone the 4 years at Brahmin, I would, as soon as I smelled something a little bit funky, because it was way earlier on, I wish I'd had the guts to say, I think this is really strange and I think we should talk about it. And I didn't, because I didn't feel like, well, that I did another job. I'm like, I'm this fashion person in Rhode Island. there's not a whole ton of, if I was willing to move back to New York, it might have been different. But what I realize now is that sacrifice to myself and not being true to myself really cost me. And so, now I really help. I mean, I'd say my superpower is helping people realize their greatness.
That's great. So we're slowly running out of time, but I have some questions that I ask all of my guests on here. And one of the questions I'd love for you to answer is, if you had just one book that you believe that everyone should read, like it should be like curriculum in school or whatever, just everyone should read this one book, what would that one book be?
Okay. Can I say 3?
You got to pick one first, and then I'll let you sneak in the other 2.
Okay. So the first one that comes to mind, honestly, is going to sound a little woo-woo, but it's The Secret.
Oh, cool.
And I've listened to it. I haven't actually read it, but I've listened to it a million times. And I just think that the opportunity to see things in a different light, in a positive light, is illuminated in that book in a way that I just think is really useful. And I think everybody should read it. I think that when you're young, you should read it, and to just know that what you do and what you put out there has a ripple effect, and there are repercussions, so yeah. So it's a little woo-woo.
Yeah. I gotta introduce you to someone he runs a program. It's one of Bob Proctor's program.
Bob Proctor. Oh, yeah. Okay. He's in the book.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going through the program right now. It's called Thinking into Results. And
oh my God,
it's an awesome,
that's so cool.
Yeah, it's a 6-month program. I think you'd love it. You'd love it. Love it.
Oh,
and the connections there are insane. One lady just raised $100 million for her company. And so there's like all sorts of people in there. It's really, really cool.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, I love a good recommendation.
Yeah. So I'll make the connection afterwards. I'll write a little note so I don't forget. That is a perfect fit.
And then if I can sneak in while you're writing that down.
Sneak in 2 more.
The other 2 would be, I loved Jack Canfield's The Success Principles. And it really talks about taking control of your own success and being really honest with yourself. I listened to that a bajillion times. And then,
what is it called? I'm sorry. Was it again?
It's by Jack Canfield, and it's The Success Principles.
Okay. Interesting.
And then the third one would be The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. I'm probably saying that wrong. Or Ondaatje. Just because the prose is beautiful. And if you appreciate good writing, that is the book.
It's called what? The English Patient.
The English Patient.
Interesting. Is it fiction?
Yes.
Cool. I don't ever read fiction, so I'm trying to start getting more of a balance.
Oh, well, if you want recommendations, call me up, because
I will.
I have a long list of favorites, and I'm constantly reading a mix of nonfiction and fiction.
Cool. Now, if you could name the biggest regret you have in your life, what do you think it would be?
Somewhere along the line, from a very young age, I equated success with recognition from the outside. And it created a really, really rocky teenage and college life. I mean, like I went through, you know, I wanted so badly to be recognized for being good enough, being enough, that it drove me into suicidal ideation a few different times in some really dark periods, because it felt like I would never be enough. And I mean, if I could go back and just somehow, you know, I don't know that what I could change per se at a young age, but to just, you know, to know that I was enough, and that the outside stuff wasn't going to fix it, because you just strive harder, like you just raise the bar. And so yeah, I mean, that was, you know, it's a regret just in terms of having lost out on some years that could have been happier, you know. I mean, in the scheme of things though, it's like, I think it makes me a richer person because I can relate on a very personal level of what that's like, of what that blackness is like when you just don't understand why anybody wants to do this. You know, and then the other regret would just be, like I said, I wish I'd had the guts in my last corporate experience to have stood up sooner and taken a stand. I think that would have, it might not have led me to being a coach though. So again, you know, but it's
no. Yeah, I get it.
You know, it's just like,
it's
I
a
wish
double-edged
I'd
sword
had the
with
guts.
the regrets, because they do lead to where you are now, of course.
Right.
But I do like I do like the answer of, like, you know, just understanding that you're enough. I think that's a really, really, really good one. Which leads me to this next question, which is might play into this quite a bit. It's hypothetical. You get to go back in time to any age and go talk to yourself. But when you're there, you can only say 3 sentences to yourself. And then poof, you're gone. What age would you go back to? And what would those 3 sentences be? And I'll leave it up to you whether or not you want to tell us why you chose those 3 sentences. And I'm strict on these rules. It's got to be 3 sentences.
Okay.
I got a little loosey-goosey and then lost all the awesomeness of the question. So we're going back to being strict.
Okay. So I would go back to probably living in Vietnam, because things were good in all intents and purposes, but that age I think was pivotal.
26, 27.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, you're enough. Stop and explore who you are and what you're striving for.
Okay.
And invest in professional help when you're not feeling like you're enough.
It's good. It's good.
You know, I think, you know, and the why part is really just, I was striving, right? I mean, I told you that this thing came, and I had, the recommendation had been to don't go straight up in this one area, broaden, you know, because you'll have a stronger base. And I didn't take that. I couldn't hear that advice. And I never, because I was so driven to just like, oh, I have to go here. Right. And I need to do this. I need to accomplish this thing. But it was like, I mean, in the scheme of things, I'm like, I don't give a shit about costing footwear products. I mean, like, no offense to the people that do it, because it's really freaking hard work. But it's like, my passion wasn't athletic shoes.
Right.
You know, and had I been able to have the wherewithal and the consciousness to like say, oh, you know, I should maybe really think about this. And had I known that there were people like coaches then, And had I done some work then, I again, I might not have ended up here. So I mean, I'm really happy where I am, but
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it would have been helpful.
I get it. It's cool.
Thanks.
I like those answers. So, got a couple minutes left. I want to make sure that people know where to find you. It's at Kamrin Huban on like everywhere, right? Basically,
Yes.
we can find you LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, not Twitter, Instagram. And then what's this podcast? What's happening?
So, okay, they
What's
can
going
also go to
on?
my website, which is just www.kamrinhuban.com.
Yep.
So the podcast, I'm super excited about this. I will try and be quick.
No, please go ahead.
But
I left like the rest of the time for the podcast. I want people to know
thank
about it.
you.
Go
So,
listen to
so
it.
I am working on launching. I probably have 7 episodes in the can. I'm working with a producer. But it's called 50 Not Dead.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about ageism. And I had come up against this, as a coach, I kept coming up against women that were feeling literally like it's like they turn 50 and they become invisible. And I turned 50 this year. I'll be 50 in November. And I'm in this fantastic place of, I feel like I have more potential for growth, earning potential, and impact than I have ever had in my entire career that spanned, different continents and companies and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I see like the next, 15 years as like blowing the doors off. And to see that many other women at this age and in this kind of age sector, so it's kind of like at 45 to like 62, like this time when actually, even if we have children, they're likely not infants. We have all this lived experience. We have so much more creative energy than we potentially had in the past, because of the fact that if you've ever parented and worked, I mean, like your creativity has to go up because you're juggling all the time, right?
Yeah.
And you're having to define your boundaries, define your priorities, make sure that when you're like your circadian cycle, like when do you work best, because you better do that shit then, because it's the only time you have. And it's like, but when you have all of this, this is the time that women should be in C-suite positions. They should be, VPs, SVPs, leading, because they lead with empathy. They have, again, this lived experience. It's often very multifaceted. And I was in another coaching group. This one was with Max Trailer, who I don't know if you know or not know.
No, I don't know.
It was a contact I got from Brittany Drost.
Cool.
And I was talking one day, and I was just like, I think I was getting so passionate about it. I'm like, I want these women to know, like, they can blow the doors off. Like, I want to help raise the conversation about the greatness that you bring to the table at this age, because you have this perspective, you have experience. And what I'm trying to figure out now, honestly, is how to elevate the conversation in C-suite positions, in boardrooms, in companies. And luckily I'm not the only one having this conversation, but I certainly want to be a part of it. And I want to help women, help break down the barriers. I'm trying to decide now, I'd love actually to get your take on it, of whether or not to ever interview men on the show. I mean, like the intention,
it's interesting,
right? It's like,
yeah.
It's 50, not dead. Like, men turn 52. And I know that some men also have experienced that same ageism issue.
You know what you should do?
But I don't know what do you think?
I think that you should stick with women for a while, but when you do introduce a man, you should get someone that disagrees with you.
Well, that's, yeah.
And then you should have an argument, like a controlled debate on the podcast. And I think that would be really interesting to watch.
That would be really interesting. I had a conversation with a woman the other day, and she,
or even women who disagree with you, but like having like an open conversation.
Attention.
Yeah.
And I wonder if they would be open and ready to admit their bias. I had a conversation with a woman the other day, and she runs a business that's, her portion is 2 billion. The man beside her runs a portion of the business that's $500 million.
Mm-hmm.
He's more senior than she is. And who I want to talk to is their boss. Like, what the hell? Like, how can this possibly be? Yeah. Like, how can this possibly be okay? And really, like I mean, I don't have any fathomable understanding of why that would be. And granted, everybody is different, and I recognize we all have to work for where we get to. And maybe there are things I don't know. I certainly don't know everything about the two players, but from the outside, for all intents and purposes,
it's the outside looking in. Yeah,
it looks like sexism and ageism. And I just, those are the kind of people that I would love to have the conversation with. Like, how do you not see this? Yeah. So anyway, if anybody is interested in having these conversations with me, please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn as Kamrin Huban or Kamrin Huban Coaching. You can email me at Kamrin@KamrinHuban.com. And I'm interested
for you. Yeah.
I'm interested to have the conversations.
Yeah, I think it's really cool to be on that. Speaking of which, brings me to another connection I got to introduce you to. This guy, Lewis, he owns a podcast company, promotion company, where he guarantees that you'll be in the top 10 or top 100 podcasts in your specific niche or genre, or your money back. So it's pretty good call whenever you want to do that. And what he's doing for me is he's actually getting me on other podcasts, which allows you to get your story out as a guest and talk about it, get more people to listen to your show, which is the way I personally want to grow. So and it's only pay per podcast you go on. So it's a really, really nice setup, the way that he's set up his business. So you're only paying for value, literally, or you don't pay.
Oh, that's cool. I'd be interested in that contact for sure.
Yeah, I don't mean to step on anyone's toes if you're already working with a production company, but this isn't production. I think it's more of
no. I mean, I'm promotion. Like I said, I'm just moving forward with the interviews, but I want to actually, I'm working with somebody to help me produce them. But what I really want to get them up and out there, because the people that I've interviewed in order to just honor them and their time and their vulnerability in speaking with me. I don't want them to have to wait forever for me to actually get this thing live. And I mean, I think it has the potential to be really cool and have some really good conversations. So yeah, please. You won't step on any toes.
Cool. Yeah, I'll definitely introduce you to him. And this is going to wrap us up right here, guys. Kamrin, I'd be more than happy to have you back on another time too. We can chat some more, talk more about what's happening right now. Maybe when you have the podcast live and everything, talk about how that's going. And I always ask at the end to guys, if you're listening, please share this out. This episode may not be for you, but like it might be like for your aunt, your sister, your mother, or cousin, maybe your uncle. Who knows? But like Kamrin, I think she gave a lot of interesting insights into her life, and from being someone who couldn't afford $1,000 ticket to China to running like coach and Adidas and the global team. So it's really, really, really cool. And yeah, please share it out, leave a review so we can get up in the ranks and get more awesome people like Kamrin on the show. And lastly, just thank you, Kamrin, again for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks. Until next time, guys. Peace.